There you are. Come in, shut it behind you, keep the warm in. Filthy night, sit yourself by the range where it's hot. I've the kettle on, and I'm glad of the company. On a night the wind's got into the chimney like that. No, leave that door, the little one in the wall there, by the dresser. I know it looks like a pantry, and there's a draught comes off it, cold enough to curl your toes, even shut. Leave it be. That's the cellar, and that's what I've kept you back tonight to talk about. For we've told you a good deal about the doors of this town, the ones you keep a light in, and the ones you lay a place at, and never once about the door that goes down. Every old house in Coldharbor has one. A cellar, dug down under the kitchen, cold as a well the year round, and down at the bottom of it, on the lowest, coldest shelf, the one furthest from the steps, there's a portion of food set by, a bit of bread, a cut of cold meat, an apple gone soft, never much, and it's never eaten. It goes up green, and we put fresh in its place, and that food is never, ever ours to touch. We call it the keeping. And of all the old customs of this town, the light on the porch, the place laid at the table, the long way home down the lit lane, the keeping is the oldest and the lowest, and the one we say least about, because it lives in the dark under the house, and the reason for it lives down there with it. Settle in, and I'll tell you what the shelf is for. The custom's a simple one to keep, and a hard one to explain to anybody not born to it, which, you'll see in a minute, is rather the whole of the trouble. When you take an old house in Coldharbor, one of the old ones, down in the first part of the town, the shelf comes with it. Nobody tells you to keep it exactly. Your gran kept it, and her gran before, and you grew up watching a hand you loved go down those steps of a Sunday with a covered plate, and come up with the old one gone off, and you never thought to ask. It was just a thing the house needed doing to it, low down in the cold, to keep it a house. What you set by doesn't matter much, so long as it's real food a person could eat. Nothing you'd be ashamed to hand a guest. It goes on the lowest shelf, hard against a cold wall at the back. And then you leave it. You look in on it now and again, the way you'd look in on a sleeping child. Not to wake it, just to see it's there and it's right. And when it turns, you change it. Same as you'd not let the flowers on a grave go to slime and stalk. We tell it to the visitors, when we tell it at all, as thrift. Old harbour habit. You keep a little by, down where it's cold, against the hungry weeks. And that's true, as far as it goes, the way the marsh is genuinely why we keep off the shortcut. A sensible reason laid down over an older one, like a clean flagstone over something you'd rather not look at. Because if it were only thrift, you'd eat it come the hungry weeks. That's what a store is for. But you don't. I have known this town properly hungry the year the fishing failed and the flower ship didn't come, and not one door in the old part of the town ate its keeping. We went thin instead, because we know in our bones, if not in words, that the keeping isn't food we're storing. It's food we're giving. And you do not take back a thing you've given to the one it was given to. There's the shape of it, then, to hold while your tea cools. A plate of good food, kept cold and kept fresh, and kept faith with, down in the dark, under the floor, for someone. Now, let me tell you what happens to a house when the shelf goes bare. Because I watched it happen to a family that came to us from away, and I never said the word that might have stopped it. The Prescotts, they were a young couple up from Boston with a little boy, and I'll say straight off they were nice people. That's not the setup for anything. Kind, and the sort that says good morning to an old man over the wall and means it. I like them, and I let it happen anyway. And that's a thing I carry. They bought the old Roskillie place, one of the very oldest houses we have. Stood empty a long while since the last Roskillie died, with no one after her. And they did it up. Beautiful. Knew everything. And they got down at last, the way you do, to the cellar. This cold, low, useless space, they'd have thought, with its damp and its one strange little shelf of gone-off food that the surveyor had wrinkled his nose at. I was over the wall in my garden the day the young man carried it up. The keeping. He'd it on a shovel, held out away from himself, laughing, calling to his wife that the last old lady must have gone quite doolally at the end. Look at this, a plate of rotten food walled up down there. He tipped it on the compost and swept that shelf clean and bright, and by the end of the month they'd a lovely finished room down there. Carpet, a couch, a place for the boy to have his friends. They'd got the cold out of it at last, they said, so pleased. Got the cold out. And I stood in my garden with a word in my mouth. Don't. And I did not say it. 'Cause what was I going to say? I was an old man they'd known a fortnight, and they were clever modern people from the city, and I was going to lean over the wall and tell them to put the rotten plate back, or something would come up out of the ground for them. They'd have smiled at me. They'd have been kind about it, which is worse. So I told myself it wasn't my place, and that likely the old talk was only old talk. And I went in and shut my door. I, of all people. I'll come to why I, of all people, before we're done. It started the way it always starts here, gently. So gently they didn't know to be frightened. The little boy first. He told his mother there was a lady in his new downstairs room at night. Not a monster, mind. Nothing so useful as a monster. A lady, and she was nice, and she came up the cellar steps very slow when the house was quiet, and stood outside his door and called him by his name in a kind voice, and asked him to come down and see her, because she was lonely in the cold and had been on her own such a long time. And the mother, a good, sensible mother, told him it was a dream, bought him a night light, and thought no more of it, which is exactly what I would have told him. That's the terrible mercy of the thing. It never asks you to believe in it. It only asks you to come down. It went for the boy a while and got nowhere. A watched child is a hard thing for it to reach. So it did what it always does. It went looking through the cold ground under that house for the voice that would be answered. The person the mother could not, in her whole heart, refuse to go to. And it found her own mother, dead 2 years, buried down in Boston, nothing to do with our town at all. But that's the thing that took me my whole life to understand. It doesn't need your dead buried here. It only needs you within reach of the ground, and it will wear whoever you loved. The keeping isn't for the ones in the churchyard. It's for the thing that borrows them. The wife started hearing her mother in the house at night. Not down in the cellar at first, just about the place, the way you'll swear you heard your own mother call up the stairs years after she's gone. That little rise on your name. she thought it was grief. Of course she did. So when it was her mother's voice, exactly her mother's voice, saying, "Come down, love. It's so cold down here. Come and sit with me a while," she wept and she didn't run, because why would you run from your mother? She got so she'd stand at the top of those cellar steps in the small hours with her hand on the light switch and not put it on, and just ache to go down. It is very patient. It had waited 300 years in that ground. It could wait a winter for a tired woman to stop minding. I don't know the whole of the last night. Nobody does but her, and she never could say it in an order that held together. I know the husband woke, and her side of the bed was cold, and the cellar door stood open, the warm seam of light gone, and the cold pouring up into the kitchen like water finding a level. And he went down after her. And what saved them? Because they were saved. This isn't that kind of tale. I'd not do that to you on a filthy night. What saved them was the little boy woke and cried at the top of the steps for his mum, loud and frightened and alive, a real voice in the real dark. And it turned her. The living one turned her back from the dead one. They took the boy and got in a car in their nightclothes and drove, and never came back to that house except by daylight. Sold it by the spring. Gone. And before they went, the young man came over my wall, grey he was, not laughing now, and asked me, quiet, did I know anything about the old house, about the cellar? And I told him, everything I'm telling you. And he listened, this clever modern man, without one flicker of not believing, because he'd stood in his kitchen and heard the cold come up his own stairs in his mother-in-law's voice. And when I was done, he said the thing I've never forgotten. You knew. You knew, and you watched me carry it out on a shovel, and you never said. And I hadn't a word, because he was right. Now, let me tell you the older reason, the one that's owed me my whole life long. Let me tell you about the winter of 1698, and why it's me, of all the men in this town, who will never let that shelf go empty again. You know some of this now, if you've sat with me before. The town was made in the winter of 1698 by some 40 souls who came down the coast to this harbour in the worst of it. What I've not told you, because there's never been the right night for it till now, is what they were running from, and what they brought down into the ground with them when they came. They came from the east, up the main coast, the true frontier of it, the far edge where the English settlements were, and in those years that edge was burning. There was a war on, the one the history books give a king's name to, King William's, though I doubt one soul freezing on that coast ever called it that. 9 years of it, the French and their allies coming down out of the north country against the little English towns strung along the shore, and the towns too few and too far apart to hold. Whole settlements gone in a night. Casco, that we'd call Portland now. Its fort fell, and the coast above it emptied of English altogether, the ones that lived through it running south with what they could carry. There'd been a treaty signed across the water the autumn before, meant to have ended it all. Word of it hadn't reached the killing yet. It rarely does. So R40 came south ahead of it, down the coast in an open winter, looking for somewhere small and mean and out of the way enough that the war would overlook it. And they found this harbour, and the winter that had been at their backs the whole way caught them here, in the open, no houses up and no ground cleared, and the sea freezing at its own edges. It was one of those winters the old people swear we don't get now. And they're right, the whole world was colder in that age, and the ground went down hard as the day it was made. You could no more dig a grave in it than dig one in the harbour wall. And they had their dead. Of course they had. 40 souls come through a war and a winter's march, and their people dying still, of the cold and the hunger and the low fevers that follow both, and no ground would take them. This is a real thing, mind. I'm not telling you a ghost story yet. I'm telling you what your own great-greats did up and down this whole coast in that age. When the ground won't open, you keep your dead somewhere cold till the thaw softens the earth enough to lay them proper. There are cold little dead houses still standing up the north coast where whole towns stacked their winter dead and waited. It's not wicked. It's only hard. It's what a hard country does. But our founders in this harbour in that winter learned there was one place the ground would still open. Down. Under where they were raising the first houses, sheltered from the wind, warmed a little by the fires they kept. The frost hadn't got its full grip. A man could break the earth in the floor of a cellar where he'd never break it out in the yard. So that's where the first 9 went. Not a churchyard. There was no churchyard, barely a church. But down under the very floors the living slept on, in the one warm ground left in the whole white world. 9 of them dug into the cellars of the first 9 houses. And every one of those houses is still standing in the old part of this town, with somebody's kitchen over it and somebody's keeping on the cold shelf below. And here's the last of it, the part that's in no book and never will be, that we pass mouth to ear on nights like this. It wasn't only the cold and the hunger made those 9 graves. You'll have heard me speak other nights of a thing this town made an arrangement with that first winter. A cold, hungry thing already in this ground when we came, that keeps to the low, wet places and calls you down in the voice of your own dead. The founders were starving and freezing, and not all of them going to live till the thaw. And something came up in the dark of those first cellars, wearing the voices of the ones already lost, and made them an offer. It would keep to the low ground, keep to the line, to the 9, and leave the houses above to the living, so long as the 9 were kept, tended, fed, kept faith with forever, so each grave stayed a grave and did not become a door. Not all of those first 9 died only of the winter. Some were given. That's the line the founders bought, and the keeping, that plate of good food on the cold shelf under your floor, is us, 300 years on, still paying the interest. A tended grave stays shut. A forgotten one opens. And I've known it since I was 9 years old, because I am the one who let a shelf go bare. This house was my gran's. I was reared in it after my own mother died young. My gran took me and kept me, and she kept its shelf the way she kept everything, without a word of fuss, 50 years without one Sunday missed. And there came a winter I was 9, one of the lean ones, the fishing gone and the flower dear. And I was a growing boy, hungry the way only a growing boy is hungry that aches. And I knew there was good food down the cellar, on the low shelf, going to waste as I saw it, for an old woman's fancy. And 3 nights running I crept down in the dark and ate the keeping. I thought I was clever, feeding myself, no harm done, the old woman none the wiser. She knew by the 3rd day. She went down and saw the shelf swept that she'd filled herself, and she never said a word to me, not one word of blame then or ever, and I've wished my whole life she'd have struck me instead, because that night the cold came up the steps. I was meant to hear it, I think. It wore my grandfather's voice, that I'd never heard living but knew, calling up soft and glad, "Mary, Mary, come down, it's cold." And I lay in my bed, and my blood went to water. And I heard my gran get up and go to the top of the cellar steps in the dark. And she stood there a moment. I've had 70 years to think what she stood there thinking. And then she went down to it, and pulled the door shut behind her so it would have her, and not come up through the house looking in the dark for the hungry boy who'd left the shelf bare. They found the door shut in the morning, and my gran gone, and the shelf I filled that day with my own hands, shaking, 9 years old, is the shelf under this floor tonight, and I've not let it go empty in the 70 years between, not one single day. That's not thrift, what I do down those steps of a Sunday. It's not even respect, quite. It's the only sorry I've ever been able to say to her, said over and over, in the one language the thing under this town understands, which is a debt kept up. So you'll understand now why I watched a kind young man carry his keeping out on a shovel with the word "don't" in my mouth, and never said it. I minded my own door too well. I'll not do it again. That's partly why I tell you these. So that's one more house that knows. There, the kettle's stone cold, and I've talked the fire down, and I'll not send you off frightened of your own good, clean, modern cellar. You likely haven't got a shelf, nor a thing under your floor that wants feeding, and long may it stay so. But if ever you come to live in an old house, in an old town, and find down in the cold of it a little shelf with a plate on it of food gone bad, you leave it. Don't clean it away to make the place nice. Find out what it wants kept and keep it. Somebody, a long time ago, in a hard winter you can't imagine, gave something down into that ground so the rest of them could live. The least we do is not let them be forgotten. Off home with you now, into the warm, and mind the step at the bottom. The fire's lit again next Friday. Mind how you go.